Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and try to squeeze in an episode here before a session. This is the kind of topic that I like in that there are some fairly simple points that could be made, but all of these points actually connect to other complex subjects and topics. So I enjoy thinking about it and talking about it, but also sometimes it's hard to sort of rein it in. And I think I'll just give you an overview first. I was thinking through, I've been doing some podcasts about narcissism, what it truly is, how it's created, the ways in which we may find it really offensive and abrasive, and the ways in which, if you really truly understood the kinds of choices and effort narcissists put into being basically functioning people in society, you might not be as angry at them. But there is a differentiation that needs to happen, and this is what I was thinking about. There are the overt narcissists, or the really obvious, more sociopathic narcissists that we think of, who are incredibly manipulative. They're really good at reading people. Sometimes they're kind, sometimes they're not. But whatever it is, it's always meant to serve their own purposes and needs. And sometimes when they're closer along the spectrum to sociopathy, it's just for the entertainment and pleasure of hurting or manipulating other people, right? So there are narcissists like that with strong sociopathic tendencies. But in the conversation around narcissism, there are people who are very narcissistic. They present as selfish, as self-interested. They present as impulsive. They lack empathy. But they are, in fact, simply emotionally extremely immature. And so I wanted to talk about these people and the different ways they present as overt narcissists or covert narcissists, although it's vastly different, and they're more amoral than they are immoral. They're not going around intentionally hurting other people and taking pleasure in it. So let's start with, right, they have a lack of empathy, they're very self-interested, they come off as very self-interested, and when they do kind stuff, it always seems to, on the back end of it, be self-aggrandizing or whatever. But let's start with what I think the basic component is for the overt narcissist version of this emotionally immature person. You can make it complicated, but you can boil the really severely emotionally immature person down to someone who simply has never deeply considered their own impulses and their own reasons and why and how they interact with people. They tend to be pretty badly traumatized. They have not processed their own trauma, though they may be aware that they went through some things that were not good. They may even be angry about it, but they don't really understand what happened to them, and they don't really understand why it happened. They don't understand what it means about them. And this becomes really important because when you see the emotionally immature being really self-interested and seeming to not care about what you think or what you feel or how things add up for you, or that you're tired or what's going on in your life, and even though they seem to genuinely care about you, it never quite translates into something that you can really experience as actual care. This is for, excuse me, this is for an entirely different reason than the toxic narcissist that intentionally enjoys getting one up on people and taking care of his or her own needs while diminishing other people's. For the emotionally immature person, their lack of empathy is because they lack a basic theory of mind of other people. They, in fact, lack a theory of mind of other people because they've never processed or deeply internalized or integrated their own experiences, and they don't really understand their own experiences very much. And so what they're doing, they're aware that they're having experiences, but they're not aware of how instinctive and reactionary their responses are to things. And they feel entitled to their reactions the way an animal feels entitled to bite if you startle it. That animal doesn't feel guilty. They're just like, it was a reaction. It was an instinct. So the emotionally immature person has been badly traumatized, has dissociated, is detached from their own experiences. They often still buy the idealized presentations of the people who abused them. So if they were abused by a narcissist or by a parent who was emotionally immature, they still view that parent as powerful and smart and adaptive and as an authority. They've never really worked it through and realized, oh my God, my dad or my mom was emotionally infantile. Like they had no idea what they were doing, and they abused me a lot and they hurt me a lot. But it wasn't even intentional, and I shouldn't take anything that they said very seriously, and I need to really evaluate the things that I believe and the things that I internalize, because they were not internalized from a reliable source. My parents were not reliable sources of how to act, how to think, how to relate to things, right? And so that person has not processed their own information and their own experiences. So the truth is, they don't even really have a theory of their own mind, right? So let's be more concrete when we think about this, at what this might mean. The experiences that I had made me instinctively, deeply cautious around moral things, around sexuality, around, blah, whatever. And so I have instincts and I have reactions depending on how people talk. And in fact, I think I was emotionally immature and pretty idealized around adults and sexuality. So I was comfortable with my own sexuality, but if someone was older than me, say 15 or 20 years older, and they talked openly about their sexuality, it really bothered me. It felt inappropriate to me. Even if I was 30 and they were 45, or I was 40 and they were 55, it felt like my mom or my dad trying to talk to me about getting laid. So there was an emotional immaturity on my part, right? But I've worked through a lot of stuff. I have a theory of my own mind. I understand my impulses, my thoughts. I understand how I came to have the reactions that I have. And so having a theory of your own mind means, let's say someone is an older adult and just considers me a close friend and is joking around about a sexual experience they have, and I start getting tight and uncomfortable. I understand my own mind, and I understand that I'm probably being unfair and judgmental. And I understand that maybe I should push my boundaries. If that person is not being really gross or weird and they just see me as a confidant or a friend, they're actually honoring the relationship and they're honoring what they see as my maturity and my intelligence. And they have a different culture around sexuality. So my understanding of my own mind and my own evolution and integrating my own experiences and understanding where those created unconscious responses allows me to also have a theory of that other person's mind. Maybe my basic instinct is like, ooh, this is weird, this is gross, like maybe they're trying to take advantage of me, or like there's, right, whatever the response is. If I didn't understand my own mind, I wouldn't be able to go, wait, slow down. This person isn't saying anything terribly weird or disturbing or anything of the sort. It's entirely possible that they just see me as a friend, and I could just sit there and like sort of like manage my own impulses and begin to see, oh, this person's not doing anything weird. They just trust me and they're just honoring our friendship and they're sharing some personal stuff with me. Right? So what happened is having a theory of my own mind allowed me to have a theory of their mind that's more open, more reasonable, less reactionary, right? So there's a concrete example where you need a theory of your own mind. you need to have explored and experienced your own mind. I think it was Henry David Thoreau who said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." If I misattributed the quote, I apologize. But that's sort of the sentiment, right? That if you have no understanding of what you grew up in, what you lived with, how it created biases and preconceptions and instinctive responses that are just yours based on your experience, it doesn't mean anything about reality. If you don't understand that about your own experiences and have a theory of your own mind and a theory of your own personality, by theory meaning, okay, you don't know exactly perfectly what you are, you can't scientifically document it, but you have a pretty reasonable theory of it. This allows you to have a theory of other people's mind that's fair and reasonably level-headed, such that when people are being reasonable or decent with you, or maybe that person is even talking in a way that really isn't my thing, I can override my instinctive distaste and be very kind and realize they meant to honor our friendship and to just share openly with me. And I can just share with them, yeah, it's cool, dude. To be honest with you, I'm like a little morally rigid and I get weird around stuff like that, but I'm happy you shared. So you can be much kinder in relationship to other people. So you come back to the emotionally immature person, why they lack empathy, and they're very self-interested. They're different than the toxic narcissist. They can present in many of the same ways. Things just seem to magically always end up like their own impulses just constantly, they impulse and impulse and impulse. Blah, and if you spend time around, it's like, oh, magically everything ends up being what they wanted. Even if you tell them, hey, I would really prefer to do this, and this is why, they'll go, oh yeah, totally, I want to do that. But then quietly this and that, and this impulse, and this timing, and this adjustment, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, how in the hell did we end up doing exactly what you wanted to do? It's not because they're actually consciously selfish. Not the way the toxic narcissist is consciously like, thinks it's funny that they're able to game other people and to get their own way, even when they don't really care about their own way. They just like dominating other people or manipulating other people. The emotionally immature person is not this way when they present as an overt narcissist, lacking empathy, right? Selfish. They lack a theory of their own mind because they have not integrated or processed their own experiences. And if you haven't, you don't really know, oh, I have a strong predisposition to be biased in this direction. And it's my job as an adult to manage that, as a conscious adult to go, that's just my bias. I don't want to sit here and dump that on everybody. Which, for example, in my case, a certain moral rigidity and over idealization is part of my character, it's part of my personality, but it was also part of my upbringing. And I understand that that biases me to be judgmental or to be rigid, and I don't think that that's right. I think in some ways it sort of makes me immature and difficult to deal with, like, right? So I can just manage that because I understand who I am and how I am and where that came from. And I can set boundaries and go, well, I'm comfortable with this, but I don't think it should be imposed on you. The emotionally immature person doesn't have the theory of mind for themselves, so they don't have a theory of mind for someone else. So let's talk more about how this translates into people feeling really manipulated or gaslit by someone who lacks a theory of mind. Let's look at this in a moment-to-moment, day-to-day experience. The emotionally immature person, without a theory of mind, without an understanding of their moment-to-moment experience, right? They tend to be very ADD, ADHD, because everything is just reactionary. They have a very difficult time stringing a narrative together and going, oh, I behaved this way yesterday, and I see myself behaving this way again, and now I see that there's this pattern of behavior. No, they're just reacting. They've never developed a real strong narrative or, again, theory of their own self or theory of mind that allows them to go, wow, there's really this pattern developing here. and it might be irritating someone else, and I should probably take responsibility for that and go to them and go, hey, I know I've been acting this way. Is there some way that I can make it up to you? I apologize for this. They're not going to do that because they're not even aware of what their patterns are. They just react in the moment and react in the moment, react in the moment, react in the moment, and react in the moment. And it's not always bad. They have good reactions, happy reactions, like whatever. They have all of it, but none of it's getting integrated and internalized. And so, interestingly, you would think that they would be easy to manipulate because they're not real aware. But when you abandon, when someone's consciousness is not forefront, the human nervous system has been shaped through millennia of really intense war, famine, starvation, threat, misery. Like, we've survived all kinds of stuff. So our basic animal fight or flight system, or our basic animal instincts are really, really strong. And if you're not conscious of your patterns, and if you're not conscious of how you're feeling and how you're responding to things, that unconscious drive to protect yourself and to attend to your own needs is going to slowly overtake and overwhelm, because you're just having a response in the moment and another response in the moment and another response in the moment. But they're all going to be biased towards your needs being met. And so when that emotionally immature person interacts, without them intending in any way, shape, or form, and in fact, they may deeply intend the betterment of other people, they may love other people, they may want to do things that are good for other people. But even when they do things that are good for other people, they will tend to do things that would have been good for them, because that's all of their basic needs. If their basic need is like, well, I hate being cold and I really want to be warm, every time they try to do something for you, they're just going to bring you a jacket. No matter whether you give a shit about cold or not, or whether that you care about temperature, or whether you're very focused on art, maybe you really wanted to go and mute, like, it doesn't matter, because their concept is just, I'm overwhelmed by my relationship to temperature and I want to do something nice for you, so I'm going to do something to help you manage temperature, whether you give a shit about that or not, right? And so then the person who's receiving that behavior is like, wow, you don't give a shit about me at all. Well, that's not true. They do. But they've never done the work and developed the subtlety of understanding around their own stuff. To hold, so imagine, right, what mature, aware adults do is you're holding all the complexity of your own background, your own impulses, your own biases, your own mood in the day, your own patterns that have been there, unconscious patterns that you're like, shit, I know this shows up. I don't feel it, but I see it show up in my behavior and other people have told me and I believe them, right? You're holding all of that. And then as you hold all that, you develop the bandwidth to be able to factor in and see what other people are going through. And you start holding a theory of mind for those other people that are around you, such that rather than when that other person seems a little worn down or out of sorts, if you struggle with temperature, you're not just like, oh, here, let me bring you a jacket. You're like, you've been noticing, oh, that person has been getting up really early, or that person's been waking up in the middle of the night, or that person I know has this huge presentation next month. If I have a reasonable, and they don't like public speaking. So it's a fairly simple theory of mine to go, well, if I'm factoring in all the stuff that's happening for that person, it's a pretty reasonable assumption to think that maybe they're losing sleep and they feel really nervous about this. And if I wanted to support them, it might look like something like, hey, I know you have that big thing coming up. You do seem a bit worn down or uncomfortable. Is there some way I can support you? Like, that might be me just leaving you alone and not mentioning it and giving you lots of space. Or if you want a hug, or if you want a distraction, and I can plan a weekend for you and I, like, what, right? So once you have that theory of mind, a pretty reasonable idea, then you can hand it back to the person and go, this is my theory of what's going on for you, and I want to support you. Now you just give me some feedback, unless even that's stressing you out, and then I'm just going to leave you alone. The emotional immature person doesn't have a theory of their own mind. They're not tracking their own patterns. They're not aware of how compulsive and present and urgent their own impulses are. That's just what they've lived in their entire life, and they were probably raised by parents the same way. And without a theory of mind of themselves, they're incapable of being aware of the patterns that other people are living and dealing with. And even when they want to support, they're not capable of it. They haven't developed the bandwidth. Okay, so there's that piece. There's the overt narcissistic presentation of the emotionally immature person who's very self-interested. They come off this way that makes people really angry about them, and people are like, oh, they gaslight and they're manipulative. They're not. They're not manipulative. They're not gaslighting any more than my 3-year-old is. That's just their basic level of functioning. They're operating on the information that they have, and they have impulses. That's what they know. And the fight or flight system and our basic animal instincts are always going to predispose us to self-serving outcomes, even when we're trying to work against that and to help someone else. Okay. That's what you would call an overt narcissistic version of the emotionally immature person. But there's another person who was my version, who I was in my past. Maybe there's still components of it, I don't know. Which is someone who is badly traumatized and they become a covert narcissist. What does this mean? If you really simplify it, a covert narcissist is someone who is really empathetic, really kind, pays a lot of attention to other people's suffering, is there for other people, et cetera, but somehow in the process of that, they make it about them. They make it about how loving and kind they are. They make it about how tired they are of other people's stuff. They might be making it about them just in their head. You may never receive the message. Excuse me. The way this is built is that when people are being badly traumatized as children, some people default to desperately attempting to meet their own needs. And you get that direct covert narcissism, self-interest. But some people are raised by a parent who will abuse and use their child, but they will back off and be neutral or sometimes even loving and kind and validating if that child takes care of the parent's needs. So what happens for that child is they're also self-interested, because we all are. We all as children are little animals who desperately want to meet our own needs. So what that child is learning is the way to meet my own needs is to make sure that other people's needs are met. This is codependency. I meet my needs by pretending that I'm taking care of yours. And maybe in the pretending of it, I actually do. Maybe I'm good enough that people's needs are actually attended to. And they're like, wow, you're a really nice guy. But it's still the same feedback loop that the covert narcissist is setting themselves up for this superior position in which they're so caring and they're so empathetic and they're so understanding, but they're always taking care of other people, but they don't take care of themselves. And they build this quiet resentment, anger, sometimes rage at the world of how full of shit other people are. So full of crap. Like people are just selfish and blah, 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 and I just take care of them. And I guess that's just what it is. I'm just doing God's work, or you know what? Jesus is my model, like whatever, but they're not actually doing it from a really generous place. They're doing it from this morally superior place, which I've mentioned before on podcasts that was my issue that I had to work through. I don't think people would have perceived it as such, but I desperately wanted my needs to be cared for, and I wanted people to understand me, and I wanted people to give a shit about me. But I would surround myself with people not capable of it. and then sit there and feel resentful and feel superior, like what, I guess I'm just smarter than everybody. Well, I'm not even close. Right? But in order to meet my needs to feel better and to feel superior and to have an identity and have this position, I was leveraging these people who couldn't respond to my needs, but I could take care of theirs to give myself that position. So in the end, I was not really caring and loving. It was not a generous behavior. I hope that I've become much more genuinely generous and loving and present to others in my own work. I intend that I feel it. I feel it. Man, I have a good time being a therapist. That sounds weird, but I love it. I love being a therapist and I love caring for my friends and my family. I genuinely love it. And when I get really tired, if I start feeling resentful, I back out and then I take care of my own needs. And I hope and I think that that's a pretty healthy way to do it. But for that covert narcissist, they actually have an amazing theory of mind. They've spent their entire childhood and their entire life doing nothing but from a driven fight or flight position, analyzing everything everyone else says, how they feel, every pattern, every behavior, every subtlety, everything, until they have this legitimately deep and profound understanding of how things are going for other people, and they're paying attention. And there are lots of people who are this smart, they can do it, but just most people, like, who has the time, right? But the covert narcissist is doing it because it's a survival instinct, it's a compulsion, because it's the only way they were ever treated decently in their childhood was when they took care of their parents' needs and attended to their parents' definitions, emotions, whatever, even to the point of becoming whatever their parents needed them to become in order for their parents to feel better about themselves. And so, yeah, the covert narcissists are really good at. I have always been really, really good at noticing things about people that no one else noticed, just because other people don't have time and it's not even their business, right? But I was compulsively obsessed with how things were going for other people, and I was paying attention, I was listening, and even sometimes I would pretend I wasn't, but I was always data gathering. And then I would have a really full understanding of who these other people were. But then it would give me this morally superior position when other people didn't notice, like, oh, that person's going through a hard time, they're pretty depressed, I'm actually a little worried about them, right? But then I would get this identity because I would be the one in the friend group who's like, hey, I'm pretty worried about this person. And people are like, what do you mean? They seem fine. And then you talk them through it and they're like, yeah, I guess maybe. Wow, John, you're really nice. Like, you noticed that. That's amazing. Is it? I mean, it's a skill. I'm proud of the skill. Is it amazing? Does it mean something nice about me? It doesn't. Or it didn't. It was a survival coping skill. I had to make sure other people were cared for and attended to and emotionally seen. But meanwhile, I was desperate to be seen, right? And so that was an emotional immaturity for me, something I had to raise my awareness and I had to evolve out of, which I still work on, right? For those of you who don't know, like anybody who goes into the field of psychology, there's some level of codependency. All of us have been through shit and we sorted through and we got good at dealing with it, so we become therapists. But there is a certain, right, all of us are working with a certain level of an impulse to take care of other people. That's not bad, it's adaptive that you go into a field in which that's valued and you get paid for it. So that's good. But you want to be really careful as a therapist that is not becoming entirely about that. That you really are caring for your clients out of a place of generosity, not because you have this fight or flight compulsion to care for others at the cost of yourself. Because you can sit there and act like, oh, woe is me, I'm so tired and burnt out, but it's bullshit. You're not doing that because you're a nice person. You're doing it because you're trying to get your own needs met, and it ain't ever going to work. Trust me. Please trust me, please. It's never going to work. So you have this other presentation. So out of the emotionally immature people who get accused of being really selfish, lacking empathy, you get these two extremes. One of them really lacks empathy, of the emotionally immature person really, really lacks empathy because they're completely overwhelmed by their own impulses, their own need to attend to their own needs. They don't have any theory of their own mind. They haven't integrated anything. They haven't processed anything. And they barely notice how they function and what their patterns are. So of course, they're not going to notice how anyone else functions and what their patterns are, not enough to support or to do anything other than to be reactionary to it, right? And then they themselves are reactionary in their own life, and then they're reactionary to the fact that they're reactionary. And if you call them on it, then they're reactionary about the fact that you call it. Like what are you asking for? Consider the source, yeah? So you have that version. And then, so that's an extreme of sort of self-interest and lacking empathy and seeming like they gaslight and blah, blah. Then on the other end, you have someone who's extremely empathetic, but they're also emotionally immature, right? Don't get confused. This is also a traumatized person who had parents who were very emotionally immature. This is an emotionally immature person who processes everyone else's stuff all the time compulsively. And so they seem really smart and they seem smarter than the other version, but their basic emotional maturity is the same. It's the same thing. They match with the other version. It's just that their coping skill makes them look smarter, right? The person who's highly self-interested, society looks down on selfishness, right, as a rule. So we're just like, oh, you know, they're not very smart, they're not very mature, they're not very kind, they don't work well with other people, and we sort of put them in a box and make them inferior. But the person who's highly empathetic but compulsively so is also emotionally immature because they're not really doing it from generosity. And also, the fact that this skill serves society doesn't mean it's healthy in the long run. It's just society is like, oh, goody, goody. Here's something that's good for me. Here's something that's good for society. Well, we think you're wonderful. We'll be very careful with that. If you're the person who's compulsively empathetic and always processing other stuff and being present for other people and, you know, but then quietly being resentful because your needs are never met. That's not a sign that you're smarter than anybody. That's a sign that you haven't really processed the lack of emotional nutrition in your own experiences, right? So you have someone who's very self-interested, the emotionally immature person, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the emotionally immature person who's extremely empathetic and understanding of other people because their fight or flight drive in an attempt to get their own needs met. They spent their entire life doing nothing but analyzing other people. And the way I really noted this for myself was when I became aware of how compulsive and how 24 hours a day and how I barely slept at night because I was constantly analyzing and reanalyzing past experiences, everything someone said, what they experienced, what they did, well, just analyzing and analyzing and analyzing. But I began to assess the emotional quality around the analysis. And there was it wasn't kindness or generosity or concern. It was in fact done with a feeling of an attempt to protect myself. If I could know and understand and be kind enough to other people, that maybe the world would become safe for me. And then I realized that's not kind, that's not empathetic. Well, maybe it's empathetic, like you understand other people, but that understanding does not come from true kindness and connection. It came from an intense desire to meet my own needs, right? So you get that other version of the emotionally immature person. The overt narcissist and the covert narcissist, as opposed to the toxic narcissist who's just sociopathic and just F's with people because it's fun for them. And they are smart. They're really smart. They know how to manipulate other people, and they recognize how other people operate and how things work, and they understand other people, but they just don't give a shit. They just use it to manipulate, hurt, to entertain themselves, to get what they want. I think that's all I have to say on that subject. It's an interesting subject to me. You're going to see a lot of it out there. Don't overdiagnose, right? People can evolve. People can heal. But it's important to know that many of the people that are attacked by society as narcissistic or as toxic narcissists are not. They're just emotionally immature, and they've never processed their own stuff. And so they're not capable of having a theory of someone else's mind, which means they're not capable of responding to other people's needs or understanding other people's needs. And then in the other case, they're highly empathetic, but there's a quiet narcissism, self-aggrandizing, and placing themselves as a center of a victim narrative. So they're still making it about them as they attend to other people's needs. It's about how wonderful they are, or it's about how no one takes care of my needs, right? So either way, it's emotional immaturity. All right, I wanted to throw that one out there. Pretty deep into the psychological stuff, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.